creating a product or a service or something, doing work or, building things that people want to buy. Well, I don't know why. I don't understand this politics of envy. If it was so easy to be super rich, we'd all be super rich.
But
at first glance, this sounds like a debate about wealth. But it quickly becomes something much deeper. One side argues that growing inequality is proof the economic system is fundamentally unfair. The other insists that success isn't evidence of exploitation, but often the result of risk, investment, and hard work. As the discussion unfolds, the disagreement shifts away from simple policy and toward a much bigger question. Are Britain's problems really caused by the wealthy, or by the choices governments have made over decades? Watch how that disagreement develops.
The evidence is very, very clear, Julia.
That it doesn't work.
There are 16 countries in Europe that have rent controls. They have more affordable housing and less homelessness than Britain does. They have more access to housing than Britain does. Between 1915 and 1987, we had a national system of rent controls in Britain.
Which led to fewer rental properties.
We had between 300 and 350,000 buildings built. Houses built in that period. Since then, we've had 200,000 built per year.
Those are two completely different policies.
They aren't.
You may as well talk about the number of washing machines that were built.
That's not true, Julia. You're making a claim. Your fundamental claim is rent controls leads to disinvestment because people don't see the profit motive in there. So of course they're not going to invest in housing. What we know is that actually the most efficacious way that you can build is to despeculate and decommodify housing and actually build council housing. That's the difference. There's a direct contradiction between those two things.
A government choosing to spend taxpayers' money on building council housing is a completely separate policy from whether you should have rent controls in, for instance, private housing. That does lead to. We know.
This is where the conversation takes its first major turn. Ashok presents historical examples as proof that rent controls work. Julia isn't challenging every number he cites. She's challenging the conclusion he draws from them. The disagreement is no longer about history, it's about whether correlation is enough to establish causation.
It's all the extra rules on landlords at the moment is already leading to lots of landlords selling and going, no, I'm done, this is no longer a good investment for me. And it's leading to rents going up because there are fewer properties available to rent, because when those places go up for sale, they're then sold, and then they're not available for rent. But choosing to build more council houses has got nothing to do with rent controls. Those are complete separate policies.
They're not separate policies. There's two things that happen. Once you add speculation into the housing market, you have both a kind of political rent-seeking issue where, the councils and the state have moved directly away from actually building council houses. We see this everywhere. As you increase commodity, as you increase speculation in the housing market, you see the state rescind and retrench away from public housing. Over and over again, we see that throughout the 20th century.
Wouldn't it be far better?
Second issue I want to say is something larger, Julia. There is a contradiction between the interests of people who are doing productive capital, not speculative capital, not parasitic capital, but productive capital, like people investing in businesses, factories, a cookie factory in London, a service place in London. The reason why they can't, the reason why we're seeing disinvestment is because people are spending 40 and 50% of their wages on rents.
Yes.
That means the cost of labor goes up. That means if I'm a capitalist wanting to invest in London, it makes it more expensive.
Ashok, I couldn't agree with you more.
Notice how both speakers agree that housing is becoming less affordable, yet they arrive at completely different diagnoses. Julia separates rent controls from housing supply. Ashok argues they're inseparable. From this point onward, the debate stops being about statistics and becomes a debate about competing economic worldviews.
Let me ask you, Gary Lineker and 120 millionaires have said they called themselves the super rich. I don't know whether 30 million counts as super rich or not, but they're saying they want to pay more tax, which of course they can easily do. They just have to email the Treasury and say, I'd like to volunteer this extra donation. Do you think we need to tax the rich more?
Yeah, I think clearly we do. And I think there's ways in which you can do it that don't lead to the things that people say, which is like forms of capital flight. Individuals, the evidence shows that it doesn't lead to capital flight. We have a situation where 50 families own more than 50% of the wealth in this country while poverty is increasing, disparities increasing. And there's some simple ways you can do that. You can tax assets. You can tax the financial services sector. If they want to operate in this country, they need to pay their fair share. And we can equalize capital gains with income tax. Most economists and most experts and most wealthy people agree it is absurd that if you earn an income, you're paying higher taxes than capital gains, who aren't earning income, they're making money off their assets.
Except if someone chooses not to just spend that money. Yes, I was going to go and buy a Lamborghini with my millions, but they choose to invest it, and then they make money on money that they've already been taxed at a high rate on if they're that rich. Why is it fair to tax that money at the same rate again? That's their argument, isn't it?
The discussion now shifts from housing to taxation, but the underlying disagreement remains the same. Ashok focuses on the outcome, growing inequality. Julia focuses on the process, how wealth was created in the first place. They're using entirely different standards to judge what's fair.
Well, you're making a lot of assumptions. You're assuming that they're making an income and making money off of that. Most asset holders are making money off their assets and making more money off their assets. That's how the system works. So if you're continuing to make money off of their...
But assets that they've purchased with taxed income.
Yeah, but that's not an income, right? So if I inherited a bunch of money and then it's tied up into assets and I'm accruing capital gains off that income, yes, it's inherited, but you're assuming that they have somehow paid taxes already on that income. So if I'm investing in buildings and using the leverage off of those to buy more and more assets and making a certain amount of money by doing no labor, earning money off of other people's labor, surely they should be paying. Is your proposal that there should be no capital gains tax by that logic?
No, no, but it's at a lower rate than income tax for a reason. Do you think
what's the reason? What's the reason it's at a lower rate?
I just explained that because it's already out of taxed income, isn't it? Because we tax people to their income, and then capital gains is tax on capital gains, which is a different thing.
This exchange reveals something important. Neither side abandons its position, but they begin talking past each other. Julia keeps asking how the tax system should distinguish investment from income. Ashok returns to whether wealth generated without labor deserves different treatment. The conversation isn't breaking down because either side stops answering, it's because they're answering different questions.
We don't, look, the Green Party is very clear. If you're earning a wage, if you're earning an income, you shouldn't be paying more taxes than the people just profiting off of assets.
Okay, and again, it's this idea of the rich people, they're just not really working. I've met quite a lot of very rich people in my time, and I would say 99% of them, incredibly brilliant, worked ridiculously hard work, took a lot of risk, like remortgaging the home and things like that, didn't pay themselves for years, literally lived in their car even. And I'd say I'm not one of those super rich. I'm intensely relaxed about those people being super rich and enjoying the fruits of their labour. If they're doing it from creating a product or a service or something, doing work or building things that people want to buy. Well, I don't know why. I don't understand this politics of envy. If it was so easy to be super rich, we'd all be super rich.
But Julia, it's not a politics of envy. There is a direct link between the fact that there is a small number of people that have accumulated an enormous amount of money in this country and the vast majority of people losing money in real terms. We know
that's bad running of the economy. That's not
that's not.
Someone being super rich doesn't make anyone else living on a council estate in Liverpool poorer.
But that's not true. So what we know is over the last 50 years, real wages have fallen. We have parts of this country where infant mortality rates have gone up. The only country in the G20 where that's happened.
This is arguably the defining moment of the interview. The disagreement is no longer about tax rates or housing policy. It's about a much deeper assumption. Does one person's financial success necessarily come at someone else's expense? That's the question both sides now answer very differently.
That's because we have an NHS system. We have a
So we have a
that's
system.
That's nothing to do with someone being rich.
That's not true. The reason why large property holding capitalists in this country have accumulated an enormous amount of money is the same reason why we have an unregulated housing market where people are paying 40 and 50% of their income.
We have a massively overregulated housing market, which stops people building houses where people want to. If it was unregulated,
50%.
If it was unregulated, we would have enough houses for everybody. And we wouldn't have sky-high housing prices.
But I've just pointed out when it was regulated for 53 years,
and when there was a shortage of rental properties,
we built 300 to 350,000 a year. Once it was deregulated,
two separate policies.
One led to the other.
No, they didn't.
To the other. It's a direct link.
If they're council properties, they're by definition under rent control because we're subsidising that rent.
Of course, what I'm saying is the amount of housing total that we built dramatically shifted from 1986 to 1988 when we deregulated the housing market.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that.
And we sold
There's
off
a
council
political and
houses, which
economic
I don't agree with. But that's also don't agree with people being allowed to stay in a council house for life when they don't need it.
What makes this debate interesting isn't that either side completely dismantles the other. It's that they approach the same problems from fundamentally different starting points. Throughout the discussion, Ashok Kumar argues that rising inequality, expensive housing, and stagnant wages are all connected. In his view, they're symptoms of a single economic model that rewards ownership of assets more than productive work. Because of that, he sees policies like rent controls and higher taxes on wealth as parts of the same solution. Julia Hartley-Brewer challenges that framework from the beginning. Rather than accepting those connections, she repeatedly asks whether the evidence actually proves cause and effect. Her central point is consistent throughout the interview. Agreeing that housing is expensive or inequality exists doesn't automatically validate every proposed solution. She repeatedly separates outcomes from the policies used to explain them. That difference shapes the entire exchange. Instead of arguing over the same premise, both speakers defend different ways of interpreting the evidence. One sees structural economic incentives as the root cause. The other sees housing supply, regulation, and individual enterprise as the more convincing explanation. In the end, the debate isn't settled by a single statistic or a clever one-liner. It comes down to which chain of reasoning you find more persuasive, and whether the links between those arguments are strong enough to support the conclusions being drawn. What do you make of this exchange? Did one side present a stronger case, or were they simply arguing from two completely different assumptions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy calm, fact-focused breakdowns of today's biggest political debates, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next analysis.